Running back ranks for week 15 to now those playoff matchups. Kicking it off with the nailed on studs. Just two this week, Christian McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs. A lot of people were struggling without Christian McCaffrey on bye this week, but he comes straight back in as our running back one overall.
Yeah, and the only question here is just how many points he gets against the Tennessee Titans, who have just been struggling against opposing running backs this year. Like, they've had games where they've been okay, but against quality opposition, it's just been really difficult for them. By far one of the worst defenses in the league. And I think that McCaffrey, there's always the kind of question of, is he going to get the work through the receiving? Is he going to get the work through the ground game? But it just ultimately doesn't matter. I think that, yes, we've seen a bit more of Brian Robinson mixing in over the last few weeks, which is good news for McCaffrey, try to keep his legs just slightly fresher. But going back over the last few weeks, there's nothing whatsoever I can see from the Titans that makes me worried about CMC here.
And then we also have Jahmyr Gibbs, who 3 out of the last 5 weeks has broken 30 fantasy points. He's seeing more and more of this backfield share, and with injuries popping up all over Detroit, does it feel like the volume is now finally going to come to one of the most efficient players in the entire league?
Yeah, I think that we can kind of point towards like the injuries at wide receiver and tight end as well have helped things, because the receiving work's so strong, like 31 targets in the last 4 games. He's been over 40 receiving yards in 3 of the last 4, had well over that in 2 of those. And the Rams defense, like, yes, they're a very good unit. They rank top 3 in rushing EPA allowed, but they've started to allow a little bit more on the ground recently. They've started to allow a little bit more in the way of fantasy points given up recently. So, I mean, look, if you got Jahmyr Gibbs, you should feel pretty damn good about your lineup heading into this week.
And then in the A tier, we've got Devon Achane, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry. Achane obviously had the rib injury where he left the game versus the Jets. Any trepidation and nerves about potentially a reoccurrence if he is active?
No, I've got no qualms whatsoever. Like, according to multiple reports, he was pushing to get back into the game. Mike McDaniel said that it was his choice to hold him out of it. And then you look at just how integral he's been to everything over the last few weeks. Like, the target share slipped off over the last couple. He only had a 4.3 and a 4.8% target share in back-to-back games. But over the last 4 before that, he was at 25% in each of them. So I don't think that we need to particularly worry about him. I think that Devin Achane, every time he steps on the field, has the potential to be the top wide receiver, as the top running back of the week. And going up against the Steelers, who've struggled at times with the run over the last few weeks. Like, we saw what Buffalo did to them. We saw that Derrick Henry was kind of giving them problems at times last week. So I think Achane absolutely can be a massive winner this week.
My Scott Fishbowl team is definitely hoping so.
Same.
Some people may be surprised to see Derrick Henry up here in the A tier. He's been quietly efficient over the last few weeks for fantasy, 8 straight weeks of 10 plus fantasy points, but hasn't broken 23. So hasn't had those game breaking weeks, but hasn't really crippled you. What is it, Tom, that's got him all the way up here as our running back 5 on the week?
Yeah, it's just been that general kind of improvement of like how much they're using. Like, 25 rush attempts last week was a season high for him. And, the biggest problem seems to be the Ravens' usage and the fact that they're so committed to taking him off the field on on third downs. They seem to be so poor on short yardage runs this year. It's like whenever a Ravens player gets tackled inside the 20 when they're on a long catch, that's such a painful thing to see, because the Ravens just can't convert in those situations. They are easily one of the worst teams in the league on short yardage plays this year, whereas last year they were phenomenal at it. But Derrick Henry's been consistently involved in the receiving game, like, not massive returns, but he's had 2 or more targets in 4 of the last 5 games, which helps. The long runs have definitely started to come back. Like, against the Bengals a couple of weeks ago, he had 10 touches for 60 and a touchdown. And you look at this Bengals defense, and yes, they've improved slightly over the last few weeks, but they've also allowed the second highest yards per carry on rush attempts since week 9. So I'm not ready to just say the Bengals defense is solid.
Before we move into the B tier, though, if you are joining us for the first time, why haven't you yet hit the subscribe button? 70% of you watching are not subscribed. Make sure that changes right now. In the B tier, we have got James Cook, Saquon Barkley, Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, and Travis Etienne. Let's start with Jonathan Taylor. Feels like this is the first time we've had him ranked this low. Obviously, started the season on incredible pace, but since the bye week, hasn't broken 15.1 fantasy points, 3 games of disappointing production. Is this Daniel Jones led? Is this the offense being caught up? Or is this just those yards and all that workload starting to catch up with Jonathan Taylor?
I think there's an element of that. There's an element of the Colts defense absolutely regressing because of how Daniel Jones was playing injured. And then obviously now Riley Leonard, Phillip Rivers. I mean, yeah, it's kind of difficult to know what's coming there. Reports out there seem to suggest that the Colts plan on leaning on Jonathan Taylor substantially over the next few weeks, which, let's face it, they're going to have to do. I would also, I would expect him to see plenty of checkdowns, particularly if Phillip Rivers is out there. Like, Phillip Rivers, there is no intermediate. It's you check it down or you're throwing it deep. And I would think that he's not in as bad of a matchup as people might think going up against the Seahawks. Like, the Seahawks run defense has kind of earned itself a good reputation. They rank first in EPA allowed against the position, but they've allowed over 4 yards per carry 4 times since week 9. Before that point, they'd only allowed 4 yards per carry once all season. So there's a path for him to kind of create more volume and to keep the ball churning, but it's probably not a ceiling outcome because the Seahawks have only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns all year.
And then also in this tier, we've got Chase Brown, who's been on a nice little stretch of viability. This offensive line has completely rebounded and is now, dare I say it, an above league average offensive line. And Chase Brown's been very much the beneficiary.
Yeah, well, since the Bengals took Jake Browning out of the lineup ahead of week 6, Adam Levitan was making this point on Twitter. Chase Brown's RB9, like the guys ahead of him, it's only Gibbs, CMC, Jonathan Taylor, Achane, Bijan, James Cook, Josh Jacobs, and Derrick Henry. And then you look at what he did to the Ravens 2 weeks ago, 117 rushing yards from the Bengals backfield combined. And obviously Chase was a massive part of that. That was the most rushing yards the Ravens have given up since week 5. The Ravens have also allowed the last 22 running back targets to be caught across their last 3 games. So I think the Bengals understand that Chase Brown can have success against the Ravens, and I just see no reason to be down on him at the moment.
And in the C tier, we've got TreVeyon Henderson, Breece Hall, Quinshon Judkins, Javonte Williams, RJ Harvey, Kyren Williams, Ashton Jeanty, Woody Marks, and Jaylen Warren. Post by rookie bump for TreVeyon Henderson, yes or no?
I don't know. I mean, we saw Ramondre Stevenson come back and immediately mix into enough of a level, which was slightly annoying. But it was encouraging because some of the high value touches that TreVeyon Henderson wasn't getting earlier in the year, he was getting. But ultimately, I think you can start Ramondre and you can start TreVeyon in this game because the Bills have been so bad against the run this year. They've allowed the 8th most fantasy points to the position. They rank 31st in run defense EPA allowed. And ultimately, I think this is what's going to cost the Bills in the playoff at some point. You can't have such a glaring weakness. Since the start of week 9, the Bills have allowed the second highest yards per carry to running backs using man gap scheme runs at 6.65 yards per carry. That is atrocious defending. And the Patriots, despite having a bye week in that period since week 9, they've run the 4th most man gap runs. So I would expect the Patriots to be very heavy on the run here. And I think that TreVeyon Henderson is going to have a great day.
And also in this tier, we've got another rookie, RJ Harvey, back-to-back impressive weeks over 20 fantasy points. But I'll be honest, Tom, I thought he's looked really, really bad despite the fantasy production. Do you think that he can continue to get lucky with touchdowns, or do you think this could be a matchup where he can run true and have a little bit better efficiency?
Yeah, it's like he's earned Sean Payton's faith, but it's kind of tallest dwarf competition, really. Like none of the guys in the backfield have looked incredible. I think that's helped RJ Harvey. Over the last 2 weeks, he's had all five of the carries inside the 10-yard line. Season high in snap rate last week, 61% route rate, which is also a season high, 17 carries last week and 6 targets. Like, those are all good numbers, but at some point he has to start being efficient on them. The Packers aren't a team who've been giving up huge amounts to the running back position to opponents. Like, I feel like this is an okay matchup, but it's not a fantastic one.
Kyren Williams is a player that some people may be nervous about starting this week, given how good and how much work Blake Corum saw. Are you confident starting Kyren Williams as an RB2, or do you think he's a player you'd rather squeeze down into your flex spot?
I think you're probably going to end up just leaving him in your RB2 spot, just out of like the body of work that we've seen over the years. But Blake Corum is absolutely earning his touches. Like, you go back to week 13 and he had 81 yards and 7 carries and a touchdown. Yes, the touchdown came whilst Kyren Williams was off the field being banged up. But then you go to week 14 and again, Blake Corum has 12 carries for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. Those kind of numbers, for the amount of yardage that he's picking up on runs, is just not something that we see from Kyren Williams. And I think the Rams have shown that when Blake Corum's hot, they're absolutely going to stick with it and they're happy to lean into it. Going up against the Lions this week, it's definitely not an ideal matchup. They've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points this year. You go back over the last few weeks and the total combined amount of PPR points they've given up to opponents' running back rooms has only been above 15 points once. So maybe it's not an ideal matchup, but in that situation, if the yards are hard to come by, maybe it swings back to Kyren Williams. I don't know. I don't feel amazing about it.
Yeah, I think the split looks worse than it actually was because of the garbage time work and how that kind of split up. I do think this is still going to be a 60-40 split in Kyren Williams' favor as the game stays competitive. Before we move into the next tier, though, if you are agonizing over that flex conversation, you're wondering who to start, make sure you dive in the comments below, ask Tom and I, and we will give you our thoughts, our opinion, and make sure you nail that start-sit decision. In the D tier, we do have Kenneth Walker, Devin Neal, Omarion Hampton, Rico Dowdle, and DeAndre Swift. We'll start with Devin Neal, who saw 70% snap share, 75% route participation rate, and 82% running backfield share last week. This is his backfield, and with Tyler Shuck, the Saints are putting up more points than you would expect. Could he be that kind of sneaky waiver wire grab that could end up winning some people leagues over the next few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, he was somebody that we talked about plenty in the waiver videos for the run up until Alvin Kamara got injured. I don't think that there's necessarily any chance that we're going to see Alvin Kamara this week. It just feels like a bit of a lost season. And Devin Neal was running back 15 last week, 19 carries for 70 yards and a touchdown. Like, those are very usable numbers. Only caught 1 reception through the air, only had 1 target. Yeah, that's where I'd like to see a little bit more, but they're not using Taysom Hill particularly. Like, I think this coaching staff doesn't feel much affiliation for Taysom Hill in the way that we've seen some over the years. Now, last time out, the Panthers, they allowed 7.6 yards per carry, and that big chunk of that was going to like Blake Corum, as we've kind of just been talking about. But they've also allowed 6 running back rushing touchdowns in the last 3 games. This is a Panthers defense that you can get out on the ground, and I would expect the Saints to try to do that. And the big thing with the Saints is that they play fast. It always gets so much easier when you've got a condensed offense, which we do have with the Saints, and they play fast. That tends to be a recipe for points.
And then also in this tier, we've got Omarion Hampton, who was eased back into work last week, only saw a 31% snap share. Are you expecting that to increase and maybe him see more work in this matchup this week?
I would, because he looked pretty good with what he had.
Yeah.
He took in 56 rushing yards on 13 attempts, caught 2 passes for 11 yards. I think when you get down to this matchup with the Chiefs, like, the Chargers don't really have the luxury of not giving it absolutely everything that they can. Now, Kamani Vidal has been good. Like, again, he looked good this week. So there's no particular reason why I think the Chargers are going to completely gloss over him all of a sudden. And Greg Roman over the years has been the kind of coordinator who is happy to lean on a committee. But Omarion Hampton, definitely, you saw the juice, you saw the burst. And going up against the Chiefs, I think it's a game where they're going to feel like they need to run the ball, they need to control the clock. Like, and if the Chargers win this, they're at 10-4, which really makes their position for the playoffs very safe. But the Chiefs, it's not an ideal matchup. They've allowed the second fewest fantasy points this year. But over the last few games, as things begin to spiral for them, they've allowed 6 running back touchdowns in the last 5 games. So I think having Hampton at this level where you pop him into your flex spot is kind of fair.
Yeah, and then one player that's on the team that's also pushing for the playoffs is Rico Dowdle. Coming off the bye week, we saw that incredible stretch in the middle of the season where he was a fancy gold mine. He's tailed off a little bit over the last few weeks, but of running backs with over 100 carries so far this year, Chuba Hubbard is the only back that hasn't had a single 15-yard run. Do we think that coming out that bye week, we see Rico Dowdle getting force-fed the ball as the Panthers try to push for a playoff berth?
Yeah, he should be. I mean, to expand on your point about Chuba, like he's also 54th in missed tackle percentage among 57 qualifying running backs. He's 55th in yards after contact per attempt, whereas Rico Dowdle's like top 15 in both those metrics. Now, this game isn't one that's suited to the running back position. Been saying it all year, but the Saints are one of the biggest pass funnels in the league. They are quite poor against the pass. But when it comes to the run, they rank top 9 against it in EPA allowed. So I think that maybe helps Rico Dowdle more. But before the bye, we just saw so much rotation between them that it was quite tough to imagine that we're just going to suddenly see it completely flip back to Rico.
And then in the E tier, we have got Aaron Jones, Chris Rodriguez, Tony Pollard, Kenneth Gainwell, Chuba Hubbard, Devin Singletary, Bam Knight, Tyron Tracy. Tony Pollard hasn't broken 15 fantasy points all season. So, of course, he drops 28.1 in week 14 to help those 12th place teams move up to 11th. Do you have any confidence in starting him this week?
No, because like it's just been miserable for Tony Pollard. And before last week, he hadn't been over 60 rushing yards since the beginning of October. That last week's 2 touchdowns on the ground were last week's 2 touchdowns were his first of any kind since the beginning of October. It's been miserable with him and Tajay Spears splitting time. And like last week, he got 90 of his 161 rushing yards before contact, which kind of points towards the fact that the offensive line just clicked in some ways against the Browns. Now, obviously, maybe that's because they were just having to concentrate so much on Myles Garrett that they were opening up holes elsewhere. I don't know. But before last week and those 90 rushing yards that he got before contact, he only had 83 yards before contact across the whole of the season. When you have a running back who is just not generating any kind of time for himself to get to the line of scrimmage or anything like that, it becomes really tricky. I don't think that this Tennessee team is going to be amazing going up against the 49ers. And the 49ers are a team who you want to pass on. They rank 27th against the pass in EPA allowed. Running backs have had some level of success against them, but it's mainly been in the receiving game. So I don't think I see Tony Pollard getting enough checkdowns to make me want to start him on, fantasy playoff week 1.
Unless it's in Scott Fishbowl, where he's doing me an absolute solid at the moment and carrying my team slightly. Kenneth Gainwell is a player who has also feasted on checkdowns, saw a 32% targets per run rate last week. He's one of the toughest players I have to rank every single week because the volume's not really there, but he's running incredibly pure. And it's like, yeah, it could absolutely continue or it could disappear and he puts up a dud. Are you the same in that you struggle to rank him every single week?
Yeah, I mean, over the last 4 games, RB5, RB9, RB43, and RB12. And you contrast how many points he's totted up this season. Like, he's got more points than Kenneth Walker, for instance. Like, and when you've had that kind of level of reliability, I do think that he is a flex play. Going up against Miami, though, like, Miami's defense has just been picking up over the last few weeks. Like, they've been sneaky good at a few different things. They've been playing tough. Since week 9, they've not allowed a single rushing touchdown. So I don't know whether this is the kind of matchup where I want to go, okay, well, if we take away the touchdowns, is Kenneth Gainwell going to be able to get there on pure receiving work? Maybe. But like, anytime you start any member of the Steelers offense, it's always a bit of a lottery.
Anytime you rely on Aaron Rodgers, you're struggling. In the F tier, we do have Kareem Hunt, Carl Monungai, David Montgomery, Tyler Algier, Zach Charbonnet, Blake Corum, Tajay Spears, Jordan Mason, Kamani Vidal, and Ramondre Stevenson. Kareem Hunt has been one of the most efficient backs we have ever seen on a single season in short yardage work, but he's adding very, very little on top of that. Can you bring yourself to start him as a flex this week, or are you trying to find some other option?
I can, because the Chargers are a run funnel. It's so much easier to run the ball on them than to go pass heavy. Now the Chiefs like to pass at a high rate above expectation consistently, but I think they'd have more success on the ground against the Chargers team, who've allowed over 4.5 yards per carry in 4 of the last 5 games. We saw Saquon Barkley finally breaking big runs, finally hitting 100 yards against them last week, when that's something which he hasn't been able to do. Kareem Hunt, for his part, has been between RB20 and RB39 in each of his last 3 games. He's very touchdown reliant. Like, when you get down to this level, we are talking about guys who need a touchdown, but he's had a touchdown in 5 of his last 6 games. So, yeah, I mean, if you've got Kareem Hunt as an RB3 flex play, or if you're in a slightly deeper league, then you should feel confident about it.
And also in this tier, we've got Carl Monungai. He's earned his way into a 50-50 split with DeAndre Swift, but it's a tough matchup. It's difficult to rely on the volume week to week. Is that why we've got him ranked so low this week, Tom?
Yeah, it definitely comes into it. I mean, it's been impressive for Monungai, and I definitely feel good about what he's given us in his rookie season. I mean, across his rookie season, he's among rookie running backs, ranks 3rd in total rushing yards with 648, tied for first at 4.8 yards per carry, and tied for second with 5 rushing touchdowns. But going up against the Browns, is it going to be the Browns we've seen who've clamped down on rush offenses, or is it going to be the Browns who just let Tony Pollard be really relevant last week? The Bears' run defense is a top 4 unit in EPA every week across the course of the season, but try to project whether that's going to go to Monungai or whether that's going to go to Swift is really tricky, and it's definitely feels like it's a reasonable floor, but maybe a lack of ceiling play.
And that is it. You have made it this far into the video. Make sure you are hitting that subscribe button, that like button, the hype button, and of course, check out these other videos we've released this week.